Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining. We're really excited to have a great discussion here today. My name is Kevin Petrie. I'm VP of Research at Eckerson Group. We are a boutique research and consulting firm focused on data and analytics. And we have worked frequently over the years with Time Extender, with Heine Iversen, CEO, and his team. Heine, why don't I let you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Kevin, and welcome everyone. So happy to be here. For those who are unfamiliar with Time Extender and me, I'm the founder and CEO. We focus on a more holistic end-to-end approach to data management. We like to say no code, but in reality, maybe a little more no code. And I think we will have a great conversation today how AI and language models, big and small, will help us automate more in the future.
Exactly. And so we're really looking forward to this. What we're going to do is I'm going to walk through a few slides to define the topic at hand, what's at stake, what the opportunity is, and some of the risks. And then Heine and I are going to engage in a dialogue, and we very much welcome participation from folks in the audience about how best to capture the opportunity to minimize the risk and maximize the rewards of using generative AI language models, especially domain-specific ones, to manage data more effectively. And we're going to do this with a real focus on what leaders of data analytics teams and what business leaders can do in order to take advantage of what I think is a compelling opportunity. Not without risk, but it's a compelling opportunity. All right, so let's define this briefly. I could probably spend 10 slides talking about exactly how all this stuff works, and I'm going to try to give the somewhat 10,000-foot view. Generative AI is a type of artificial intelligence that's been around for a while. Artificial intelligence has had numerous false starts over the decades since it was, I think, founded as a concept back in the 1950s by some folks at Dartmouth. What's really giving AI a boost lately are advances in computing power, especially cloud compute, which is elastic, advances in algorithms, and advances in data, the variety and the volume and the velocity of data that's available. So generative AI is based in no small part, the primary aspect of generative AI that's getting the most attention right now is a language model. So this is an artificial neural network that has nodes that are sharing inputs and outputs. It can learn, summarize, and generate content and create textual answers to natural language questions in a pretty powerful way. So I think we all know in the tech world, it might be like major events in history where we all remember where we were in November 2022 when we first heard about ChatGPT 3, which demonstrated really the power of what's possible with generative AI now. Essentially, it scours large volumes of text, converts words into tokens, generates numbers or vectors to describe those tokens and how they relate to each other. So a language model can understand in a pretty powerful way the statistical relationships of words and start to generate strings of words that become pretty logical sentences and paragraphs. It doesn't know anything in a fundamental human sense, but it does generate some pretty articulate, fast answers to a wide variety of topics. This creates some incredible opportunities. And the explosive adoption, I think we've all read about, within 2 months, ChatGPT 3 had 100 million users, and that's a pretty powerful adoption curve. If we look at data engineering and data management as a case study for that, and that's going to be the focus of our topic today, we've done some survey work here that indicates, and this was even a few months ago, so the numbers have certainly gone up, 43% of data practitioners responded to Eckerson Group that they are already using a generative AI tool such as ChatGPT or Google's Bard for data engineering. The use cases here that are common include learning new techniques, generating starter code for pipelines, and then a big one is writing documentation, figuring out how to understand and generate quick documentation of data assets in your environment, and also pipeline artifacts. So 3, of course, of early adopters have told us in another poll that they're up to 30% more productive, and the rest are actually more productive, they believe, because they're using these tools. So there's a lot already happening here, and the horse is very much out of the barn. If we drill down a little bit about what the specific aspects of data management are, I think the ones that are most relevant to being assisted by a language model are ingestion, moving data from a source to a target, transformation, which can include formatting data, joining it, merging it, filtering it, quality checking it. There's also data ops programs that at Eckerson Group we've done a lot of research on, which help improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of data management, data delivery with CI/CD, continuous integration and continuous delivery of pipeline code, testing of pipeline code, and monitoring and ensuring you have best practices for that. Then there's orchestration, which is orchestrating and making sure that sequences of tasks within pipelines and across pipelines and between pipelines and applications are synchronized. So there's a lot going on here. I think the key point is that a language model assistant, perhaps based on GPT-4, perhaps based on something proprietary or a mixture thereof, can really help data engineers get more done faster. There are, of course, risks. And so some of the risks are familiar. These are all risks that we know well, unfortunately too well. They're persistent, old, familiar problems in the world of data management. Data quality, so inaccuracies due to errors, insufficient inputs, inconsistencies, or a lack of context. And I think that's a big one when we talk about language models. Explainability is important. Enterprises need to make sure they understand why they got a certain answer and inspect that. Lineage of data helps a lot. Privacy is critical. We're dealing with GDPR in Europe, CCPA in California in the US, and there are probably going to be more regulations related to privacy that apply directly to AI. Handling of intellectual property is another factor, probably less of a factor for the case study we're looking at with data management and data engineering, but still important. And then, of course, there's fairness. Organizations want to make sure that they're not perpetuating bias that might exist within non-random samples of population data. So data teams need to closely inspect and validate and govern the language model outputs. That also means governing inputs, because if you have the proverbial garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So all this points to a massive trend that we see here at Eckerson Group, and we're using the term small language model to describe it. But I think the key point is that it's time to get domain specific. There are the large language models that have come out from Hugging Face, there's Google's Bard, there's OpenAI, there's Llama, which was built within Meta, or previously known as Facebook. And so these are all trained on vast amounts of data, scoured off the internet, and billions of parameters, or even 1 trillion parameters possibly with ChatGPT-4. They're powerful, but what organizations need to do now, if they're going to roll up their sleeves and solve hard problems like data engineering in a governed way, it really makes sense to take that logic or similar logic and apply it to domain-specific data. And that's the heart of what a small language model is about. It's fine-tuned training on enterprise data, or it's enriched, very detailed user prompts. So injecting domain-specific data into the prompt to GPT-4, as an example, can generate some pretty powerful or more reliable outputs. Or you might augment outputs. You might have a way to query a relational database and kind of fact check what you're getting from the language model. So these domain-specific small language models can reduce risk and boost productivity by providing more governed and specialized outputs. So we anticipate a boom in these small language models, these domain-specific models. And I think one harbinger of that trend is that Databricks spent a fair amount of money on Mosaic ML, which has a platform to help organizations build, train, fine-tune, and prompt these models with domain-specific data. So another survey that we have says 30% of data practitioners are building their own language models now, and 20% more plan to do so. So busy times. So that's how we want to frame the discussion here. And I'm really excited to chat again with Heine. He and I have had a couple of pretty interesting conversations about the fast changing world of data management, and agreed that this would be a good discussion for us to have with folks who are leading data teams and also leading business teams. So Heine, thanks again for joining. So why don't I put a question to you and then chime in with thoughts, and we can see where this takes us. Heine, of the founders that I've talked to, numerous founders in the data vendor space, I think you're the most focused on the business value of these advances and helping business-oriented people get value from data management. Maybe you could talk about what you see as the business value of generative AI.
Absolutely. I think that there are so many different business values. A few of them are related to data management or data products or data warehouses or analytics in any form. Most of the business facing use cases, as I see it, is in marketing, it's creating content, it can be used for automation. But if we take a step back and look at the data management space, look at what is it a data engineer is doing every day, then I think it's wonderful to see that people are picking it up. It's wonderful to see and read the stories online, that people can, enrich and accelerate the work with DBT, writing scripts by basically asking ChatGPT to do it and then copy paste. Completely agree. There's a giant value in that for that individual. But I think sometimes when we are in generally not only talking about language models or AI, we need to remember, why are we doing analytics? We're doing analytics because we want to create value somewhere within the business. I mean, maybe my goal is to create a fancy data product. But if I ask the CEO of that company or the board of that company, that's not their goal. Their goal is to have a data product that can make them more profitable, win more business, do something more efficient in the line of business. And that's where I also think we need to envision language models when it comes to data management.
I think that's a great perspective. And it's interesting to see, because there is this huge wildfire grassroots movement of end users seizing onto ChatGPT in order to get more productive. And the numbers we have show that they are getting more productive.
Yep.
But one thing that I've noticed is that there are not a lot of enterprises yet that are creating formal guidelines for data engineers or data teams about how to use those tools. I'm curious if you see a similar trend, and if there's a need to, I think, govern that usage and guide that usage. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think in general, I think we are all experimenting. So having, that nobody has a very long history with this technology. So of course we don't have, kind of a for dummy book to look up and say, okay, this is your policy and this is what you need. No doubt that we need to govern it, especially if we want to use it in a fully automated process. That means that we need to figure out, how do we make sure that it doesn't hallucinate? How do we make sure that we can always trust the output? If it's writing some code, helping me accelerate writing code for a script, I'm an experienced data engineer. I look at the code and said, sorry guys, that was the 1 out of 10 that was bullshit. Let's try again. But if you put it into a fully automated process, it becomes a very, very different thing. Then we also have to remember, I'm based out of Denmark right now, that we are starting to see legislation coming in many countries. EU is coming out with an AI Act, and that puts a lot of, boundaries on basically not what you can do, but how you need to do it. And I think that combined with this risk that, and we can discuss in another time for length, if it's a real risk that they steal our IP and steal our data. There's so many different opinions on that. But the reality is that it's a thing within enterprises. A lot of the CDOs, they would say, no way that you can share. We also hear the interesting stories that, oh, IBM said that you cannot use it. Sorry, guys, that's BS. That's because you can only use it if you use Watson. Of course, you cannot use train the competing AI model if you work in IBM. So, but you're more than welcome to use Watson, which is basically the same and has the same problem as an end customer. We need to govern it. We need to find ways to teach our organizations how to do it, because I'm not sure as you said, this Wild West, people are just trying stuff. I'm not sure that we can wait and we can rely on a corporate IT function to put in the tools that we're allowed to use, to put in technology that will make sure that we don't get it wrong. We can get part of the way, but we have to also go with the flow and find ways to train, educate, and accept that sometimes, yeah, we did it wrong and we just move on.
Fail fast and learn faster, as Randy Bean would say. So I think that's a good segue to the next question here about data products. There's a lot of focus on data mesh. Within that, we find the data product is a concept that probably has the most traction right now because enterprises want to support all this innovative activity across business lines with data by creating standardized Lego pieces that are data. It'll include data, the associated metadata, some pipeline code potentially, and it can be reused and reused throughout the organization. What are your thoughts on how CDOs working with business leaders can put in place programs to create data products using generative AI?
I think, to be honest, that the most efficient way of doing it is to take a step back and say, how do we actually generate these data products? So we can, of course, as we talked about, we can bring in AI into help us writing scripts. We can use Copilot. There's so many great tools out there that also my teams are using every day to be way more productive than they were a year ago. But the process is still the same. We're still, having the same group of people. So it's about how do we accelerate the production of the data product? But what if we actually took one step back and said, hey, maybe we can take generating AI to the next level? What if we can take and say, you don't need to have all these people involved. Basically, you just need the business people and somebody, a data engineer, but not to write code, but just to make sure that the data modeling or these concepts are still being done. But you can do it on metadata. Because when you start to build a data product, you start from the business side, right? So that means that you're figuring out what it is you need in the business, and then you have to build the pipelines and the data warehouse, data lakes, whatever you want to do it virtually, can be done in 100 different ways. But you end up working backwards. And in that moment, when you start working backwards, what if you could just, in more graphical, draw this is what I want. This is the data product. This is my output. This is the data sources I have. I want this from Salesforce, this from SAP. I want this from an external system, maybe. And then because of now we have all the metadata. Now we can use a language model to basically figure it out, write the code, connect to the different data sources. We can add in a rule, graphical again, or verbal, a rule, a generator for data quality to make sure that we get, we capture anything that we don't like and put it to a data steward or whatever. But if we do it in a holistic way, everything is based on just generating the blueprint. That's my vision. That's where I see that we can go with this. It's not about helping the developer being more efficient. It's about taking a completely new approach that we can and it probably needs to be a small data model then, so that we can control the quality of the output, and then it will generate and optimize your data product without any of these extra steps and 6 months works.
So I know that Time Extender has an offering in this space, and would love to hear your describe what it is, and also what you're learning from early adopters of your generative AI, of your Copilot, your Xpilot capability.
Yeah, I mean, we're not completely there with the vision I just explained. So I'm not claiming that we have a model that flawlessly can do all this, but as we have the blueprint system, we have the graphical interface to go from data source to data product semantic model all the way into Clip, Tableau, Power BI, ThoughtSpot, whatever people wants to use with full lineage, and full documentation. So based on that, we actually have all the metadata. That's why we have now the Xpilot. The Xpilot is still very, very good in guiding our users what to do next, how to do something, how to connect, right? So we are not really there where we just do it for you, but we have the language model driven, the Xpilot, that will guide you Okay, how do I connect to Oracle? Oh, but you need to download this driver. You need to do it like this. This is all the steps. And so we are not far. We don't trust it enough, to be honest. Well, I like that people actually see, okay, this makes sense. So it's still a data engineer, but of course we make that person way more efficient. But because we have the metadata, we slowly can just infuse small language models into the solution to help with data quality, to help with data catalog. I mean, why do I need to have people setting up a data catalog? I have all the metadata. I just need a prompt somehow and then ask, and then I can get an answer on what data is available. And we couldn't do all this, and we couldn't take this journey the next 2-3 years, or how far, let's see how fast we can get everything done if we didn't have the metadata. So the metadata has been our definition of how to do it with low code since we started 2006. But now I think we can, take an AI will take automation to a completely different level where there will be no manual work. It will be focused on the data and the value for the business. The rest we will figure out to automate.
So great stuff. We had a CDO, Chief Data Officer TechVent, a digital event a few months ago related to data catalogs. And I believe Wayne's term was that we're in an age of metadata, because it is so critical to realizing this promise of data products, among other things, but just making sure that you have governed and consistent understanding of all the assets in your increasingly complex data environment, including structured and semi-structured and unstructured data objects. So one of the lessons that we've seen with early adopters, some of the folks that I've talked to that are using the large language models like ChatGPT for data pipeline, is they need to inspect the outputs pretty carefully. So they're getting more productive. They're saving time. It'll generate starter code for them. It'll save time on documentation. But they need to put an expert eye on the outputs to make sure that it's accurate. And so we haven't seen yet a decline in the skills required of the users. It does seem that can happen over time when we see broader adoption of domain-specific language models that are trained on enterprise data that's governed. And so that sort of leads me to my next question here. How should enterprises adapt their data governance programs to address generative AI? I have some thoughts here, but Heine would love to hear your thoughts first.
I think that is a very interesting question. Hopefully we will not see. My concern is that because of the amounts of risk that we are being fed every day in the press and in different settings, that it will grow too big, so that the governance will end up holding innovation back, holding the learning back. And as I said earlier, I think it's important that we strike the right balance. I don't know what the right balance is. I guess that per industry it's different, size of company, country-wise. So maybe there is no one size fits all in this, but control what you can control and train your people in using it. And then I'm sure that we will find solutions. There will come software solutions, different technologies, maybe another language model that will check the output of the first language model against something, just to make sure. And then I actually do believe if we follow the thinking behind the small language model, I think we are into a very, very positive space, because the way I see it, and maybe this is too simplified for people who really can do all this AI programming, but I see that the work and the training that is going on for the large language model, that is kind of deciding how advanced my brain is. It doesn't tell anything about what I have learned. I think we can separate the content. That's also why we can feed it with our own prompts with tons of extra content, and then suddenly it knows something else, right? We can feed it a book and then suddenly it can talk about the book, right? No.
Yeah.
So I see that as, so when we take the small language model, we base it on somebody that has spent this amazing amount of compute on NVIDIA graphic processors to train all these billions and trillions of neurons. And then we empty for all knowledge, right? And then we feed it with only the knowledge that we wanted to know. That alone, I'm convinced, will remove 80% of the hallucination that the model will do.
I think that's exactly right. I love the concept, and the analogy might be taking an 18-year-old that aced all their exams and has a 200 IQ, and very carefully managing what you're asking them to do, giving them very specific guidance, tasks, context, in order to ensure that with the right inputs, they could generate some incredible outputs, but making sure that the inputs make sense. And it does seem that the majority of this small language model deployment so far is based on prompts and less on the fine tuning in terms of training. Yeah. So if you can refer it to the right product documentation as you answer a data engineer question about pipelines, then it can generate a response that is much less likely to hallucinate. So that makes a lot of sense. And it does seem that all the key elements that are required for generative AI exist within data governance programs today. Data governance is not a problem that most enterprises have solved, and by far, but if they can take the key elements, looking at data quality, looking at master data management, looking at policy creation and enforcement through the right roles and processes, then they can extend that to address text files, other things that are going to be feeding into language models. And it seems critical for that because there is going to be a convergence of generative AI with other types of analytics and operational workloads. It kind of leads to the next question, but the highest value language model use cases I can think of are where the language model is not a standalone platform. It's not ChatGPT 4, but rather it's a feature within an existing platform. So if a customer is accustomed to going to their customer portal in order to ask questions, the language model should be underneath that. They shouldn't have to go to a new platform. So it basically becomes a feature of Slack. It becomes a feature of the CRM tool that the employee is using. And so I guess the question, if we turn that model to data management, do you believe language models will become must-have features of data management? Bit of a leading question.
Yeah, maybe I should say no. No, I think the answer is but the answer is partly no, and that's because I'm not sure that in the future, I'm not sure that I see it as a feature. I will see it as more something that is just there. It's fundamental. So it's not something that we will list when we'll have these crazy, I know, sorry, marketing people, but you make all these comparisons between us and everybody else. And funny enough, the company who do the list always have more features than the rest of the competitors. So
funny how that works out,
right? That's how it works, right? But I don't believe that on these lists that the language models or generative AI necessarily will become a feature. The reason is that if you look at the way our approach, but also multiple others in the industry, the moment that you start flipping it around and say that metadata is not something that we collect afterwards, it's not a second thought, it's not a separate product that we put into to what I call the Frankenstein of all these 10 tools, right? And then we try to see if we can connect it and find and manage to get metadata out of all these tools and put it together somewhere. When we start to flip it around and say, okay, but we are actually designing our data flow, our data products, the whole environment based on metadata, not by writing code or looking at the actual data, but based on, okay, what is it actually? What is the flow of data and what is my desired output? Then we don't really have any place to put in AI as a feature, but it's going to be the reason why that you can just basically draw with a pen one day. Hey, I want this. I'm done. And then there's a model behind, right? I think it's a reason that we will be able to accelerate how fast these platforms, these holistic integrated platforms, will be able to support and also be multi-cloud. We already have that internally. How can we use language models to rewrite the code so that you can seamlessly move between Azure, Synapse, and Snowflake, just as an example? It's exactly the same blueprint. And language model. So language model will be the full engine behind, I think, next generation platforms, but it will not be a feature.
That's a very interesting way to look at it. It's almost, I tend to agree. I think the expectation of the user is going to be that they converse, that it's a conversational interface, and that the platform that they're interacting with is smart and thinks on its feet. And we have 3 boys ages 10 to 17, and all of them have an expectation when they pick up their phone that they can talk to it. They don't need to use their thumbs. I mean, they will, but there is an expectation that it's going to be a conversational experience. And when you're using a phone, you're asking it silly questions, there's an expectation that some of the answers will be wrong, and that's okay. Obviously, there's a higher bar with a data engineer or a data architect trying to build pipelines. But that expectation that it's a conversational experience seems to make sense.
But I believe that the first place we will see these conversational experiences will be on the front end. ThoughtSpot, I think, have already started. They had the idea, and now they also got the technology to basically take the delivery of the offering next step. So the whole thing that we have spent time pre-building dashboards, pre-building reports, and then people try to figure out, even I try to find, and within TX, where's the report I need for this, right? But I think in the future, you will have a data warehouse, you will have some data products, or at least you will have a data estate that is governed, controlled, data quality is done. So we have some steps that we have persisted between the data sources and the user. Because if we have like a very governed, very structured, high quality data warehouse, just as a simplified example, and we put a front end on that you can just talk to, and it will just find all the data because the data warehouse is fully documented. It has access to all the metadata and everything else that it needs. Then it will become a much more easygoing experience for the user. But if you give them a tool that can do that, and even Power BI or something, and then it needs to figure out and find its way through connecting with passwords and credentials to connect to all these different data sources that we have, then we lose governance again, then we lose data quality. So I think we need to think in these steps and make sure that one step actually can expose also through APIs. So that's something that we are releasing in the next 4 or 5 weeks, is that anything that you have within your data warehouse, you can drag and drop and design your own API interface to expose that data to any application, right? Because we believe that is going to be very important in the future. That it's not only, it's much easier for a language model to understand a REST API and then just connect to it and give it the result.
So let's talk about how data management roles will change. If we get back to the initial focus that you had on business leaders, it seems that as the quality of the data management tools backed by small language models with governed inputs and governed prompts, as the quality of what they do improves and the reliability, you could have increasingly generalist type people use it, more business oriented analysts, more business oriented sort of citizen data integrators, if you will.
Yeah.
And so that's great. I'm curious if you think that will be mainstream soon. There's a lot of promise about data democratization and helping folks in a data mesh scenario prepare and consume their own data products. Are we close to that in your view, what you've seen with some of the early adopters?
I think we've been close to that for the last 15 years. We have. It comes down to the approach. If I look at our journey, I mean, 80% of the work that is being done from data source to semantic model or data product within a time extender setting is done by and can be done by people who has zero coding experience when it comes to SQL. Mm-hmm. Don't know how to write scripts. Some customers it's 100%, some customers it's 70%. My point here is that it comes down to that if we believe, and I believe AI is going to do one big thing, it's going to finally get the acceptance within the data engineering or the data community that these complex things of building pipelines, managing and operate them and optimize them can actually be automated. So that's the biggest thing that I've been debating with people over the years is, yes, behind it, how can you actually automate this? This is very complicated. And I said, yes, it is. But we spent 15 years building code that knows exactly what to do on all the different deployment platforms. But that's just, and so the moment that we will see this mind shift that, okay, and we already see that they use ChatGPT to write their scripts. Sorry, guys, that's automation, right? So that means that we will write less code, and one guy in a large organization will be able to support a lot of these data product groups, because they don't need to have a full hardcore data engineer, developer in the team, but they might need to have someone in the organization that we can call upon when we run into some of these issues that we still not have figured out to automate. And we'll just take that to the next level. So the role of a data engineer will change. Just like it changed, we used to do pure SQL. Now a lot of stuff is done with Python. We have the new tools. So there's constantly been this development. I think the big difference is that they will 6 months, 12 months from now, starting to see that they will write less code. They will apply the knowledge, very important knowledge they have when it comes to understanding data modeling, which is the thing that I think needs to come back. Everybody who's at analytics as code, they kind of forgot data modeling was the thing. I think they will learn to have governance and quality and language models. We need data modeling to be the center. And that's what I also mean with the blueprint. We need to understand what is possible. How can I actually link these different data sources? How can I link it all together to get my output? And then let the machine do the implementation. So there will be a lot of work for them, but they will be more efficient.
So it'll be interesting to see if we look at sort of the line here of a certain base amount of technical acumen required to interact with data. You'll have business-oriented people that can kind of reach down and do things that were previously too technical for them. And then you'll also have data engineers and data architects that can become more strategic and more business-oriented because they're not spending as much time on the technical stuff. It seems that a data engineer will become more of an architect.
I think that's a good way to put it, yeah.
And so another question I think would be, do you think that they will have a prompt engineer as a specific role related to data management? I tend to think that prompt engineering will become just a part of the job description for a lot of people, including analysts, citizen data integrators, data engineers, and architects, rather than a standalone role. But I'm curious what you see in terms of that role.
I think writing prompt, as you also stated earlier in your presentation, will become easier and easier over the coming years because the models will be specialized. So the moment that we have a specialized model, I think it will be easier to just write. Prompt engineering to me is just a new term. I don't think it will be a job, a role within data engineering or within data management, as I believe that we will just, we will take it one step further. You don't need to write a prompt. You just need to drag and drop or tell what you want to happen. But what I do believe is that problem that we need to fix in the future. And that actually ties into data literacy, right? So if you don't have a clue about, what data I potentially would like to look at, how I would like to set up my KPIs, define my KPIs, my measurement, what makes my department successful. So all these problems that exist today, right, they will still exist. And if we give you a prompt, you need to still be able to explain, okay, I think it could be interesting to see, I would like to see my sales per partner crossing with something, and this is what I would like to see, because it makes sense to me as a user. And I still think that we have a big task out in the organizations on how do we train people to simply be able to think the question way before we need to train them on how to explain it.
So this is great. So I do encourage folks to chime in with questions, and it looks like we have a few here. And I think perhaps I'll direct the first one to you, Heine, from Sam Gamble here. Please discuss how the roles of data stewards and business process owners might change.
I think they will have a life that will be so much more easy. So if we take data stewards needs to basically, they have a big role within the data quality. They need to make sure that when we give them data, that they verify that it's okay. They have a lot of tasks. The list is long. I think that we can build, again, with metadata, but also give them interfaces so that that's at least how we see it, that they can train a small model themselves, not because they know how to train a model, but simply based on what they are doing, based what actions they take. So every action they take, when you have a platform that are based on metadata, and at least most of the data quality solution, master data management solutions, they are moving in that direction. They have a ton of metadata. That also means that we can be able to fuel it with a language model. That means that every action we take, it's no longer machine learning. It's really training the local model. It's within your domain. It's knowing your data. It's completely isolated, but it will learn. And that means that over time, it will just fix. It might send you a report that it's what it has fixed. The business process owners, I think they will also get an easier job, because their job is to guide and help figuring out what is it we want to do? What is it we want to automate with data? What data do we need to validate or measure a certain step within the business? But if we can give them more and more graphical tools where they can just, like Power Apps or similar, they just design, the flow, and then AI will help behind the scenes. So I think they will both be very important in the future, but the job will be easier. Maybe it will not be a full-time job, be easier to allocate part-time resources within the different business units to take care of these things.
And it is interesting because I think the part of the challenge is that enterprises keep needing to serve new users, new use cases, new applications, new devices, new projects. And then on the supply side, they're absorbing new data types, new data sources, and so forth. And so just trying to keep up with all that has been hard enough. And so maybe the data engineers and the data teams overall, the robots are arriving just in time for them.
Of course.
So there's another question here from Gokula Mishra. Why have companies not created that perfect data warehouse? What are the challenges? And Heine, Gokula asked this about 10 minutes ago, when I think you were kind of describing the vision of blueprints and the notion of simplifying and sort of abstracting away from data. You said we've been close to it for a while, and maybe you could talk about what the challenges have been to date.
And maybe some of the challenges, if I talk to customers, try to understand, sometimes you run into a company, and there was a telco, they had 14 different data warehouses. And I said, okay, so why do we have 14 and not one or maybe two? And they said, okay, that one over there was built once we had a different billing system by people who are no longer here with no documentation, but we do know that we are using it as a source for some stuff in that data warehouse. So they actually said, I said, okay, but Heine, can you fix it for us? I said, no, you have to build it from scratch. Yes, but we don't know. And now we're also changing systems. So I think the short version is that the moment that all this is done by writing code, and people have not, because who wants to write documentation? So the documentation does not exist. And it's been built over many years. And the speed of which we're changing source systems. If we only changed it every 10 years, that was probably easier. But we don't, right? On average, you have like 150, 200 data sources in a mid-sized corporation. If you count in all the marketing stuff, Facebook, LinkedIn as well. So I think it's just too complicated. But imagine that we slowly getting into a process where, yes, but it's my blueprint. And okay, I got a change of my data source. That means that I just add that, or just make that change, and then it flows in. And then because you can separate today, time extender, but there's also others who can do this, separate your blueprint from your underlying technology, because that's the next problem. These projects used to take so long that suddenly they were running on insufficient hardware, or they were running on technologies, database technology was outdated. Microsoft came with new, Oracle came with new versions, and oh, we have to start all over to get up to that new version, and then cloud came. I think the future is, and this is also where language models will help, is, hey, my blueprint is here. And if I want to move it from Azure SQL to Azure Synapse, I just hit a button. If I want to move it down on-prem to SQL Server, I hit a button. If I want to move it to Snowflake, I hit a button. I'd simply just right now explain what we already do today. We migrate in 10 minutes between cloud and on-prem on Microsoft. And the moment that we start to be able to do that within more solutions, within more products, then we can also start building the perfect data warehouse, as long as we do one very important thing. We do not build a star schema-based data warehouse. That is the killer for why a data warehouse will not succeed in the long run. We need to make sure that the star schema belongs in the data product or in the semantic model.
Okay.
Because, I can just give an example. We have to change our fiscal year. That's a major dimension to change in a star schema. So reality is, we have no issue because we had just to build a new data product / semantic model, but my data warehouse was exactly the same. That was time ignorant, you could say, right? So that meant that, okay, we just want to see the data, but that means that I have two different data products on the same financial data, showing different numbers, different year-to-date, different, growth numbers, and it was super easy. But I have met so many customers when they do Kimball models on the data warehouse, then suddenly something changes, structure changes, and then we need to have both, and it just becomes a mess.
A religious data warehouse.
He retired, Kimball retired, maybe the data warehouse model should retire with him, I don't know.
So Gokula responded to what you just described and said, in essence, create a loosely coupled system architecture.
Yeah, you could say that's one way to do it. I believe that once we deploy it, it's actually very tight coupled, but every element can be flipped out. But it depends. If you want to do it with a modern data stack, yes, you need to find a way to do it a little loose, so that you can flip out one technology without interfering on the entire project.
Good. Well, we have a few more minutes if we need it, and other folks can chime in with questions or commentary. I've really enjoyed this and think that it would be very interesting, Heine, to see how much changes in the next 6 months or 12 months, because it's a fast-moving target. And I've been stunned at not just the broad user adoption, but the broad enterprise adoption, to try to roll up their sleeves and see how they can gain competitive advantage, improve productivity, and even improve creativity and training with their workers. The ability to interact with a ChatGPT or other type of platform in order to learn a new domain, provided you trust it's a domain they understand well, can be pretty powerful. And so you can come up with, you can end up with a lot smarter, more productive workers if you do this well. So we live in interesting times. So we do have a question from Gokula. They would like to see the time extender product in terms of Copilot capabilities.
Well, I will reach out on the website, or send me an email on hki@timeextender.com, and we'll be happy to set it up.
That's great. And perhaps you could talk about, is it private preview status or where you are with your offering?
No, the current offering, including the Xpilot, is GA. The offering, so also the offering that can seamlessly move around between the Microsoft and Snowflake data storage technologies, because that's basically not really based on language models. So what we have today is available on the website also as a freemium to spin up and start working with it.
Excellent. So Gokula, very much ready to use and see. Good. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. Great conversation. Thank you, Heine, for making me smarter. And 6-12 months, see where we are.
We'll be back, Kevin.
All right. Thanks again, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.